Okay. All right. Here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. Thrilled to have back one of my favorite guests, Shari Botwin. Shari, welcome back.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So look, Shari has been counseling survivors in recovery from all types of traumas in her Cherry Hill, New Jersey private practice for over 28 years. Her second book, Thriving After Trauma: Stories of Living and Healing, deals with overcoming trauma, including physical and sexual abuse, war-related injury, loss due to tragedy or illness, and natural disaster. Her third book, due out in a few days, it's titled Stolen Childhoods. She's been chosen by Tantor Media to narrate the audiobook, which comes out on June 11th. Is that right? June 11th? Okay.
That is
She's a
right.
regular she's a regular guest trauma expert on the Law and Crime and Network. Additionally, she served as an expert witness in high-profile cases of sexual assault and childhood abuse. Welcome back.
Thank you. And thank you for having me back.
Of course, of course. You're so friggin' inspiring. I mean, Jesus, writing these books and even more than that, Sherry, it's just you. You just you bring this genuineness and advocacy and a clear compassion for this work, and it's something that like yes, I want you on my podcast. So
Oh,
thank you.
thank you. I appreciate that.
So before we hit record here, you said this book has been really hard.
Mm.
Talk about that.
Oh my goodness. So this time last year, I was writing the book. And so I had like 4 months to write the book. I think I started February 1st and finished on June 30th. As I'm right, yeah. Uh-huh. Exactly.
What?
I know. But as I'm writing the book, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is so hard. I remember as I wrote the book, every like 2 to 3 pages, I had to get up, do something, distract. Sometimes I would write like a couple paragraphs and then I would start texting my friends and saying, I don't know what I was thinking. And I don't want the listeners to think it's that hard to read because I don't actually think it is. Now that I did the recording of the book and listen to the book, I understand why it was so hard for me to write the book. But once I start listening to it, I think, oh, okay, well, I understand why this was so hard to write, but I'm so glad that I wrote this book.
Well, when you
It,
say hard to write, what do you mean? I mean, because that could be many different ways.
yeah. So, what do I mean? So, in this book, I was very open about what happened to me. I remember when you had me on your show after Thriving After Trauma came out, you asked me, um, about that I had left the perpetrator out. I had talked about being a survivor, but I didn't say who abused me. I didn't really say where the abuse happened. In this book, I decided I'm going to say the whole truth. I'm not going to
Wow.
hold back. And as I wrote it was hard, but then after I would think, oh, this is like the part of me that feels like I shouldn't be speaking. Look what
Hmm.
I'm doing to people in my family. My dad died. He's now been gone 23 years. So the last day I was in the recording studio was April 12th, 2024. He died April 12th, 2001.
Oh,
And I
wow.
remember saying to myself, he's been gone for 23 years. And what I did in this book is I said what happened to me. You asked me last time, why didn't I want to talk about who the abuser was? And I remember saying, I wasn't ready. And what I meant by that was at that time, I was ready to talk about being a survivor.
Hmm.
I had been talking about that for about 6 years, but the idea of I think this was more about me, but the idea of putting it on paper and having to see it and hear there's always a layer of me. And I think a lot of survivors that want to think maybe it didn't happen or maybe I was wrong.
Hmm.
After writing the book and then reading it in the recording studio, there's no way. I mean, because as I sat in the studio, I sat in my body and I remember thinking, you know exactly what happened to you. And you know, based on what you're feeling in your body as you're reading the book. I know that when I was writing the book, the part of me that gets up and down, a lot of times what we do is we do whatever we can to avoid our feelings. It's very common with people I work with. So I was like, yeah, you're just like all the other people that you see. And there are things that I still notice about myself. So to be able to sit in a studio and read page after page and not have to be like, oh, I need a break, got to get
Mhm.
up. There was none of that. So I think that it's really very healing and important. And I think we all, as survivors, do things when we're ready in the way that works best for us. I must have known before I started writing this book that I was ready. And then I think it just sort of happened from there.
So the book is titled Stolen Childhoods, Thriving After Abuse. Why did you write it? Why
Mhm.
did you want to write it? And I guess with a book like this, it almost feels like something you need to do. But share with us.
So when I wrote Thriving After Trauma, there was conversation about, is this book going to be specifically for survivors of abuse, or is this book going to be about all forms of trauma? And at that time, the publisher and I think myself, we both felt it was important to put a book out there that addressed multiple kinds of traumas. You know, I work a lot with combat survivors, people who've been through gun violence, natural disasters. When I thought of the title of this book, and then I started thinking, well, this book is obviously going to be for adults who were survivors of childhood abuse. The thought that I had, and I had a conversation with my publisher about this as well. I don't think that 10 years ago, this type of book would have been received very well, because I think even though people, especially after hashtag Me Too, people are more open about sexual assault and childhood abuse. I feel like over the last few years, there's been even more attention. Now we're starting to have hearings and trials for enablers, for people who were participating in the abuse. There's all these different cases, R. Kelly, all these different cases that really are more geared towards people who are assaulted in their childhood or teens. And to me, when you're a teenager, you're still a child. And to be able to write a book specifically for adults who've lived through any type of childhood abuse, it seems like a narrow topic, but there's so much information. There's so many themes that come with being an adult who survived childhood abuse. It's a different type of experience than somebody who was 25 and assaulted and never had a history of abuse.
Right.
So to be able to really dive into some of the themes around being a survivor, and I felt it was really important to talk about how can we be parents? How can we be partners? How can we be successful in our lives as adults when these crazy making experiences left us feeling so bad about ourselves and so ashamed of ourselves? I really wanted to write a book to help people understand that you can move through those feelings, you can heal from those feelings, you can feel differently about those feelings as you're an adult longer and longer. And you look back and think, well, now that I'm, 50 something years old, now that I'm a parent, now that I have a husband or a wife, or I can really see this really wasn't my fault. And I'm not damaged. And I may not feel like a normal person. I'm normal, just like you and everybody else. But what's not normal is what happened to me. To be able to actually really talk about that in the book and offer strategies for the reader. There were so many things that I struggled with when I was in therapy, and I would not wish that upon anybody, to have to go through the hell I went through in my recovery. So to be able to also offer different types of coping mechanisms and different strategies. So if and when you're ready to start speaking your story, feeling your feelings, to know that it's really, really, really hard, because now we have to sit with the feelings that we
Mm.
couldn't feel as children. To be able to write a book and explain, these are some things you could do. These are ways you could reframe it. This is another way you could look at it. It just feels so appropriate and healing, especially for me at this time in my life. I'm now a parent to a just turned 13-year-old. So he's still a child, but when I think of stolen childhoods, I think of like 7-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds. So to be able to look back on my experience as a parent for 13 years, and also I share many stories of other people I work with, and to watch how people heal and evolve as they move into different roles in their adulthood. I just feel like it was so important. And I'm so glad I wrote the book. So glad I didn't quit and take
Hmm.
the paper and the laptop and throw it out the window, because I did a couple times say to my friends, I'm not doing this. And my one friend, Sandy, will say, but Shari, are you having fun? Because you always should have fun when you're doing your work. And I'm like, Sam, this is so not fun. But then I was like, no, I'm actually having fun, because after I was able to write another part of a chapter, then I would go into feelings of celebration and empowerment. And when I feel happy and victorious, I dance around my house. I act silly. I have fun. I crack myself up probably 20 times an hour. So I was thinking, well, it's a good question that she's asking. And yeah, I actually, when I wasn't in agonizing pain and thinking I can't do this, I had a great time.
I first of all, I mean, Sherry, you have so much courage.
Mm.
I mean, I can't imagine going through what you've gone through. I did not go through that. And, it's easy for me to sit here and talk to you but I can't imagine that. And to go through that is just unfathomable. To write a book about it. Again, I mean, Jesus, you talked about when you were going through your own therapy, it was I think what word did you use? Awful or
It was
just
agonizing. It
agonizing?
was,
What about it was agonizing?
because I think once I started remembering stuff and telling my therapist different things that happened to me, I got hit with so many feelings. I got hit with the shame, the pain, oh my gosh, I can't act like it didn't happen. It felt more real. I re-experienced what I felt right after I was abused by my dad. So then I would then go into those feelings, like, so I called them the day after memories, knowing something was really wrong, thinking something was really wrong with me, feeling like I don't fit in, I don't want to be here. So when you start speaking about the trauma, you remember what happened during, and oftentimes then you remember what happened after. And that, to be able to sit in a therapy session and then leave therapy and have flashbacks. And I had really bad body memories, which is when our bodies re-experience the physical sensations of what was done to us. So I mean, I remember I would say to Dorothy, there wasn't a part of my body that he did not hurt, whether it
Mhm.
was things that I felt in my arms, my legs, my back, different parts of my body. And then it was very repetitive. It would just sort of go on and on. And if I had a thought like, I can't believe I'm doing this, I'm such a horrible person, then my body would be like an explosion, because my body was trying to say to me, you need to hold on to the truth. You need to keep speaking, and you need to know that your body doesn't make these feelings up. So
Mhm.
now I can look back and go, well, thank you, body, so much for being such an amazing container. But as I was going through it, there were so many times where I just thought, I really don't want to be here. And Dorothy would say to me, you don't
Dorothy
want to
was your
be,
therapist?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Um, she would say to me, you don't want to be here now in like 2010, or you're remembering that you didn't want to be here before. She always helped me place that feeling, because a
Mhm.
lot of times when people are having flashbacks and they're in trauma therapy, they talk about having what we call suicidal ideation. That's what that is. It's a memory. It's a memory of feeling like I wanted to die. I wanted to run away. I always wanted to get hit by a car. So once I started driving, it was scary, because
No.
I'd have these thoughts about that. And it was so helpful for me to hear her say, let's place the feeling. But at the time, I still had to feel it. And I
Mhm.
wouldn't wish that on anyone. So to be able to write a book and say, if you start feeling like you don't want to be here anymore, try to think of it like this. So maybe the reader will experience that feeling one time or five times and then move through it. I felt like I felt it 100 times a week sometimes. And it would literally take me 6 weeks to go from speaking the memory to moving to a state of, what did I used to call it? I used to say like a warrior on. I don't remember the phrase I had, but something like, but basically like, oh, I guess I made it through that one. It would
Mm.
literally take me 6 weeks of just working through it to actually feel back into my life in the present and feel good about myself again. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody.
This s- book sounds like it would be almost invaluable for people who are listening, who, I mean, it just sounds like you're bringing so much, again, courage to what you've gone through. And it sounds like it would be an invaluable guide for people who maybe haven't even yet found a therapist.
Yeah, and that was the other thing. I wanted to really make sure that the reader understood not everybody goes to therapy, not everybody can find the right therapist. Therapy isn't the be all end all for everybody, but the things that I put in the book involved partners, friends. I actually wrote a whole chapter just for supporters of abuse survivors because I think that's important too. Like, you want to be able to have a tribe of people behind you, and you want to know, how do I utilize the supports of this person, of that person? How do I not bring feelings of distrust into that friendship? So to be able to also explain in the book to the supporters of loved ones, what to do, what to say, how to understand it, that for me also felt really important to talk about. So I think of this book more as a guide. It's not a book
Hmm.
that says you have to go to therapy or else, or if you don't go to therapy you can't be happy.
Hmm.
My therapist changed my life, and I saved my own life because of her, I believe. But I know not everybody will find that or have that. Some people can't access that kind of therapy, they can't afford it.
Right.
So I never want people to feel left out or like, well, I can't do that. I don't have a car. How am I going to get to a Dorothy Sainich's office? So I tried to really be mindful of that and think about what are some other things people could do if they can't go to therapy, or what are some other things people can do when they go to therapy, but it's not enough?
I mean, with the understanding of and the appreciation of everything you said, yes, not everyone can access therapy, but, and again, with the understanding that I did not go through this type of abuse, I mean, it would seem to me that it would be an, how do you not have a therapist?
Mm,
Someone who is a Dorothy, right?
yeah.
Who seems like she knew what the heck she was doing. How do you, it just seems like you've got to have someone like that to go through this.
I think, I have talked to some people, not necessarily in therapy because I'm their therapist, but for instance, I have been working on a case. I'm serving as an expert witness in a case involving dozens of women abused by a pediatrician when they were children and teenagers. Many of these women, I have testified on behalf of over 40 so far. I think maybe 4 or 5 of them have therapists. And what I am noticing in this case, there are definitely some women who are really having a hard time and really, really want to go to therapy. Actually, one of them talked about that in her hearing, that she just started seeing a therapist after her and I met. But then I've talked to a lot of those plaintiffs who they never went to therapy, but they found really supportive partners. One of them talked about her job as a nurse and how that had been healing. Another younger woman who's now, I think, 41, talked about going and doing something very similar to me, having a child through fertility, and that for her, that was the thing that she needed to do to really kind of like jump over that hurdle and really begin
Mhm.
healing from what this doctor did to her. So I can't imagine going through what I went through without Dorothy, but I know that people are resilient. And when somebody really wants to be better, feel better, people figure it out in their own way. I know people who have turned to different types of art and singing, music. For them, that became their therapy.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
just
No,
think it's,
well said.
yeah.
I appreciate that. So, who would you say the book is for?
Definitely for survivors, 100%, but also for their partners, definitely for therapists, I'm hoping that people in the legal system read the book. I had a judge reach out to me the other day saying she wants to get copies of the book. Anybody who really wants to understand more what it's like to have their childhood stolen in the form of abuse and to be able to really understand what it means to be trauma informed and to understand the process of recovery and healing. So, really, anybody that is in the company of somebody who has that type of history, teachers for sure, because again,
Hmm.
teachers have students in their class every year that either were abused, are being abused now. So I would say anybody who has some type of connection to people who may have been abused or who are survivors, and of course for survivors.
I like the fact that you said, you know, in response to my question, well, you don't need a therapist. You know, yes, it would be great if you had a Dorothy, but you don't need that. I mean, that to me is very empowering to hear. And, you know, I think we're living in an age now where, I mean, I think we've all heard of the statistics of how many women are abused, any men too, but certainly more women are abused. Um, when you're sitting there, you know, and so many of our listeners here are therapists and coaches and counselors of various kinds. What would you say to them in terms of working with, beginning to work with people who've gone through abuse, childhood abuse? What is
What I
what is what is required? What is necessary? What is vital for them?
It's vital that they know their own story and how sitting with people with histories like childhood abuse, how that could trigger their own stuff. One of the things that I find very interesting for younger therapists, and of course, this is something that I can relate to, when people start out in the field, they don't often know what their own issues are because they're young. So a lot of times people go to school, they become therapists, and then they're encouraged, which I think is a wonderful idea, to go to therapy. So you know what it's like to be on both sides. Well, if we just started going to therapy when we got our master's degree, we're in our earlier mid 20s, we started working in different facilities and we're working with survivors of abuse, it's important to think about how does this work impact me and my own experiences, and what do I do about that? Like, how do I take care of myself in that? What if, like, I'm talking to one of my clients who's a survivor and I realize in that session that person just triggered a memory in me? What am I supposed to do? So what I would say to newer therapists is make sure, again, you have a lot of support. I think if you can go to therapy, absolutely go to therapy. If you can access supervisors, supervision groups, colleagues, meet with them once a week, make join, like, form a support group of
Hmm.
your peers and start talking in that group about the work that you're doing and what you're realizing about your own life. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people, and a lot of these clients are also therapists, who say to me, I did not know that what my parents were doing is abusive,
Hmm.
because abuse is not always, okay, well, my dad punched me in the face or my dad sexually assaulted me. I have talked to so many people who've experienced forms of emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, the kind that
Hmm.
you can't see and you
Right.
can't really, you think in your head, well, this is normal, or isn't this what all parents do? I just think it's important when you're doing this work to know that if you realize in the work with other clients that you too have something in common with them, don't run from that. Jump in it, like, jump into it and say, okay, here's my opportunity, because now this client just helped me take ownership of another part of my past that I didn't even know was a problem.
Is, you know, you sit here, you've written these books, you're uh, you know, an authority in the field. My guess is you're healing and thriving is a process. It's not an end result. It's not, you know, you don't just go get to this point and wave the banner, I'm done, I'm healed.
I
My
wish.
guess is
I
my
used
guess
to. Yeah.
it's a process. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I remember I used to say to Dorothy, how much longer do you think we're going to be in this part of therapy? How long does this trauma therapy bullshit take? Um, uh, well, I'm 53 and almost a half now, right? And I think maybe for like the last, probably since I started writing Stolen Childhoods, I no longer go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going back there again. I thought I was over that. I don't say that anymore. I don't know what clicked in my brain, but now I say, no, like you probably for the rest of your life will get hit at times with flashbacks, feelings. You will thrive and then you may retreat some and then you're going to thrive more. The process is lifelong in the sense that
Mm,
if you've experienced something that has changed your life in ways that are not even explainable, understandable, don't put pressure on yourself to be done with this healing or be cured of PTSD. Judges a lot of times will ask me, can you cure PTSD? And I say no, but I don't say it like no, like as if it's a like woe is me.
right.
No, because there's going to be things that are going to happen every day that will trigger different parts of our brain. We have all these different sensations that we experience. Some things are just going to get activated. So when I think of the process, I think every time we're triggered, it's another opportunity to work through another piece of our past. Does that mean that we're always going to be suffering? I don't think so at all, because I work with a lot of people who they have moments. One person says, I'm having a PTSD backslide. And I'm like, all right, let's get on that slide and figure out what the hell's going on here. And then let's move through this. But it's okay because we always come out on the other end feeling stronger, more empowered, and I think stronger.
Hmm. Do women come up to you and talk to you about your books and or book and I'm curious what
So
that's like.
oh, okay. So with Stolen Childhoods, it hasn't come out officially, but all the endorsers read the book and the pre-orders started going out, I think 3 weeks ago.